The glass-walled conference room was silent when my brother Martin slid my resume across the polished table, barely glancing at it before letting it drop to the floor. "Better luck next time," he smirked, his eyes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I picked it up, dusting off the corner where my old Callaway Systems ID badge was still clipped. Intact, just like my resolve. "Have you ever been underestimated by your own family, only to come back stronger?" "Share your story. I'm listening." The polished glass doors of Callaway Systems loomed ahead, reflecting the muted gray sky of early spring in Seattle. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and pushed through, the sharp scent of industrial cleaner hitting me first, followed by the cold hum of fluorescent lights. The receptionist barely glanced up as I approached. She typed my name into her screen with a practiced indifference, before nodding toward the elevators. 40th floor. They're expecting you." The elevator ride felt like an eternity. Each passing floor was a reminder of how far I'd come, and how far I still had to go. Callaway Systems had always been a name spoken with reverence in the tech world, a fortress of innovation and ruthless efficiency. Now I stood just one conversation away from securing a senior position within its walls, or so I thought. The doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a hallway lined with glass walls. I could see figures moving inside conference rooms, heads bent over tablets and screens. At the far end, I caught sight of the main boardroom, a vast space encased in glass, overlooking Seattle's skyline. That's where he was. Martin sat at the head of the long glass table, fingers steepled under his chin, a smirk plastered on his face as if he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. His eyes flicked up when I entered, scanning me from head to toe before settling back on his tablet. "You're on time," he said, without looking up. His voice carried the same tone he'd used since we were kids, like I was interrupting something important. I walked across the room, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, and handed him my resume. He took it, glanced at the front page for no more than a second, then tossed it onto the table like it was a flyer for some yard sale. "We'll take a look," he murmured, more to the board members flanking him than to me. They nodded in unison, polished and poised, eyes sharp with expectation, but softened by their association with him. "Tell us about your experience, Emmett," one of the members prompted, her voice clipped and efficient. I cleared my throat, keeping my eyes steady. "For the past 5 years, I've been managing system integration projects for 3 mid-sized firms. We streamlined their data processing, cut costs by 15%. Martin coughed, a sharp interruption that bounced off the glass walls. "System integration for mid-sized firms," he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "That's noble." His smile stretched, teeth perfectly aligned, as if he'd rehearsed it. I swallowed the irritation that clawed its way up my throat. "I also led a migration project that allowed real-time monitoring for inventory management. It boosted—" "Inventory management," Martin interrupted again, this time addressing the board members. "I didn't realize we were looking to optimize warehouse logistics." A chuckle rippled through the room, restrained but audible. My fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "The technology is adaptable. It can be leveraged to optimize—" Martin raised a hand, silencing me with the ease of a conductor halting a symphony. "We appreciate your enthusiasm," he said smoothly, sliding my resume to the edge of the table, letting it dangle like a piece of discarded trash. "But enthusiasm only takes you so far." I watched as the paper teetered on the edge before slipping off, fluttering once before hitting the carpet. He didn't even flinch. I could feel the stares of the board members, the way their eyes skimmed past me, as if I'd already been dismissed. Silence stretched thin and awkward until Vanessa Cole cleared her throat. I glanced over, catching her gaze for the first time. She was seated at the far end, eyes sharp and steady, fingers tapping quietly on her notepad. She gave me the smallest of nods, just enough for me to notice. Martin stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Better luck next time, little brother," he whispered as he passed, his breath warm and tainted with mint. I stood rooted to the spot for a moment longer, watching him stride out with the effortless confidence of someone who'd already won. I bent down, picked up my resume, and smoothed out the creases. The thick paper felt heavier than it should have. I turned to leave, my footsteps heavy against the carpet. But just as I reached the door, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to find Vanessa standing there, her expression unreadable. "Meet me at Archer's Cafe at 7, she whispered, voice barely above a breath. "We need to talk." Her hand slipped away, and she moved back into the room, leaving me alone with nothing but the weight of her words and the faint, lingering scent of lavender. Archer's Cafe smelled of burnt espresso and regret, a fitting backdrop for my bruised ego. The rain from earlier that morning had left streaks against the windows, casting long shadows across the scratched wooden tables. I chose a seat near the back, far from the noise of the espresso machine and the hum of conversations. Outside, cars splashed through puddles, their headlights blurring in the misty rain. It felt like the kind of place where bad news could be swallowed with bitter coffee. Vanessa arrived exactly on time, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She wore a navy trench coat, its belt tied neatly at the waist, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested she wasn't there to linger. She spotted me, waved briefly, and approached with the confidence of someone who never had to question her next step. "Punctual as always," I remarked, standing as she slid into the chair opposite me. She gave me a half smile, more calculated than friendly. "You know me," she replied. Her fingers drummed softly against the edge of the table before she leaned in. "You look like you've seen better days." I chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "You could say that. I assume you didn't ask me here to discuss the weather." "No," she said simply, unbuttoning her coat and draping it over the back of the chair. "I didn't." Her eyes flicked up, catching mine. "I wanted you to know the truth." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "The truth?" Vanessa reached into her leather bag and pulled out a manila folder, placing it carefully between us. Her manicured fingers tapped it twice before sliding it toward me. "Go ahead," she urged. I hesitated, then flipped it open. Inside were printouts, email chains, meeting notes, calendar invites. My name appeared frequently, along with times and dates I recognized but didn't quite remember. I flipped through the pages, my brow furrowing. "What is this?" "Evidence," Vanessa replied, her voice steady. "Your brother has been manipulating your interview schedules, delaying meetings, changing times, even canceling appointments without your knowledge." I stopped on a particular email chain, one from last October. It was a confirmation for an interview with the VP of Development, a role I had been chasing for months. According to the timestamps, the interview had been scheduled for 10 a.m. My confirmation email, however, stated 11:30. I remembered showing up, waiting for almost an hour, only to be told that I had missed my slot. I had chalked it up to a miscommunication, a clerical error. But here, in plain text, was the truth. My jaw clenched. He changed this? Vanessa nodded. More than once. The implications hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. Years of stalled progress, closed doors, and missed opportunities. None of it had been coincidence. It had been orchestrated, manipulated. My hands tightened around the edges of the folder, knuckles whitening. "How long?" "Years," she said simply. "Since you first applied. He's had access to the admin panel. You're not the only one, but you are definitely the most targeted." I shook my head slowly, disbelief wrestling with rage. "And you knew about this?" Vanessa met my gaze evenly. "I suspected, but it wasn't until recently that I got access to these." She tapped the folder gently. "You can thank Rick for that." "Rick?" I repeated, barely catching the name before a familiar figure appeared beside our table. "Still drinking your coffee black, I see," the voice said warmly. I looked up to find Rick Dempsey standing there, his beard a little grayer, his posture just a bit more stooped, but his eyes as sharp as ever. He carried with him a thick stack of papers, neatly bound and marked with small tabs. Without asking, he pulled up a chair and joined us. "You always did like to make an entrance," I said, leaning back. He shrugged. "Some things never change." He placed the stack of papers in front of me, patting the top. "I'd say you're going to want to read through these." I flipped the top page. It was an internal call log, marked with timestamps and user IDs. Martin's ID repeated over and over, tied to changes in scheduling, calendar wipes, and email redirects. Every missed opportunity, every closed door. It was all here, documented with brutal clarity. "How did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rick smirked, glancing at Vanessa. "Let's just say not everyone in IT is as loyal to your brother as he thinks." He leaned forward, tapping the paper. "He's been using his admin privileges to control the flow of information. You were never supposed to see half of your opportunities." I swallowed hard, the weight of it crashing down. All this time. Vanessa placed a hand on mine, her touch surprisingly gentle. "You weren't losing because you weren't good enough, Emmett. You were losing because he made sure you did." I stared down at the printouts, my hands trembling slightly. All those years, I had thought it was my fault, my shortcomings, my mistakes. But it had been him, orchestrating it from behind the scenes, cutting me off at the knees before I even knew I was standing. Rick reached into his pocket and slid something across the table. A watch. Old, tarnished, and cracked right through the center. I picked it up, its weight heavier than it should have been. "What's this?" "Broken time," Rick replied simply. Thought it was fitting. I turned the watch over in my hands, the crack running jaggedly across the glass face, a symbol of the years I'd lost, the opportunities stolen. I slipped it into my pocket, feeling its weight settle against me like a promise. Vanessa leaned back, a flicker of a smile crossing her lips. "Be ready," she said, sliding a business card across the table. Her eyes met mine with a glimmer of something unspoken. "This isn't over." I took the card, running my thumb along its embossed lettering. Archer's Cafe faded into the background as my mind began piecing together the possibilities. For the first time in a long while, hope began to claw its way back in. The rain tapped against my window like a reminder of what I had to do. It came in steady bursts, trailing down the glass in rivulets that blurred the city lights outside. My apartment was silent except for the hum of my laptop and the faint clicking of the wall clock. A rhythmic countdown that seemed to echo the urgency pounding in my chest. Stacks of paper were spread across the table, overlapping like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Email printouts, calendar logs, project proposals, every document I had managed to pull together from old archives and forgotten file cabinets. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing the bridge of my nose, the fatigue settling deep into my bones. But there was no time to rest. Not now. The phone vibrated beside my coffee cup, its screen flashing with Rick's name. I answered immediately. "Got something for you." His voice crackled through the line. "Check your inbox." I set the phone down, pulled my laptop closer, and opened my email. A single message from Rick waited at the top. No subject line, just a link and the words, "You're going to want to see this." The link took me to a secured server, one I hadn't seen before. As the video loaded, the screen flickered for a moment before settling into a grainy image of a boardroom, Callaway Systems' main conference room, unmistakable with its panoramic view of Seattle. The timestamp read, March 14th, 2021, the date of the interview I'd missed. I leaned in, breath catching in my throat. The room was empty at first, chairs neatly aligned, the table spotless. A few moments later, Martin walked in, a folder tucked under his arm. He was alone, humming softly as he made his way to the head of the table. He opened the folder, pulled out a stack of papers, my resume, and began flipping through it. I watched, fists clenched, as he thumbed through each page, pausing every now and then to shake his head. He picked up a pen, scribbled something across the top, then stood, walked over to the trash bin by the window, and let the papers fall in with a soft flutter. He dusted off his hands, adjusted his tie, and walked out without a second glance. The video ended abruptly. My hands trembled as I paused the screen, staring at the frame where my resume lay crumpled in the trash, discarded like an afterthought. I reached for the phone, dialing Rick's number without hesitation. He picked up on the first ring. "You saw it?" I saw it. Rick's voice lowered. "That's just one. There are others." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Others? Video logs, email chains, timestamp adjustments. He's been at this for years, Emmett. He's built a wall around you, and he made damn sure you never saw it. Outside, the rain hammered harder against the window, streaking it with fresh trails of water. "Where did you get this?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Rick chuckled, low and steady. "Let's just say not everyone in IT likes working for your brother." I stood up, stretching the tension out of my back, eyes still glued to the paused frame on my screen. "We need to pull everything," I said firmly. "Emails, call logs, video footage, every single piece." "Already on it," Rick replied. "Vanessa's got access to the encrypted logs. She's sending them over as we speak." As if on cue, my inbox pinged, and a fresh stack of files appeared, marked with dates and timestamps. I clicked through the first one, an email chain from 2 months ago. The timestamps didn't match. Messages I had supposedly missed were sent hours before I even received them. Martin had been editing timestamps, rerouting critical conversations, and even rescheduling meetings to times I never agreed to. It was all here, laid out in front of me, indisputable proof. Years of setbacks, missed opportunities, and lost connections, all orchestrated by my own brother. My hands shook as I stapled the documents together, feeling the weight of it press against my palms. This wasn't a series of coincidences. This was sabotage. The phone buzzed again, a text from Rick. "Time to go public." I stared at the screen, the rain still tapping against the glass like a clock counting down. I looked back at the printouts, the videos paused mid-frame, and the emails that now told a story I had been blind to for far too long. I straightened up, running my fingers along the edge of the desk. "Public it is," I murmured, voice steady and resolute. Outside, the rain began to ease, but the storm inside me had only just begun. I walked back into Callaway Systems, and the security guard at the front desk blinked twice as if I had returned from the dead. His gaze followed me as I strode past, shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble floors. It was the kind of place where every surface gleamed and every breath felt monitored. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. Today was different. Today, I wasn't here to ask for anything. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, and I stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflecting a version of me I hadn't seen in years, back straight, eyes clear, shoulders squared. I punched the button for the 40th floor and watched as the numbers ticked upward, the silence punctuated only by the soft hum of the machinery. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched out in front of me, the familiar glass walls revealing Callaway Systems in all its pristine arrogance. Men and women in sharp suits drifted between offices, heads bent over tablets, voices hushed. But as I walked past, conversations quieted. Heads turned, whispers trailed behind me. Martin's voice echoed from the conference room before I even reached it. He was laughing, loud and confident. "I told you," I heard him say, voice dripping with certainty. "He's never coming back." I paused outside the glass walls, taking in the scene. Martin stood at the head of the table, gesturing expansively to the board members who nodded along with every word. Vanessa was seated off to the side, legs crossed, pen poised above her notebook. Her eyes flicked up when she saw me, and I caught the smallest hint of a smile. She straightened her posture, capping her pen deliberately. I pushed open the door, and the room fell silent. Martin's hand was still mid-gesture, his smile frozen for just a beat too long. His eyes found mine, and the smirk slowly faded. "Well," he said, regaining his composure. "Look who finally decided to show up." I ignored the chairs lined along the side of the room and walked directly to the center of the table. My hands shook slightly as I placed the thick folder down, the weight of it landing with a satisfying thud. I straightened, meeting Martin's gaze. "We need to talk." One of the board members cleared his throat, eyes darting nervously between us. "Mr. Callaway, this is a closed—" "It's fine," Martin interrupted, waving him off. "If Emmett wants to embarrass himself, I'm happy to watch." He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced behind his head, arrogance radiating off him. I ignored the comment and flipped open the folder, pulling out the first stack of emails. "This," I began, holding up the printed sheets, "is a record of every single interview confirmation I've received from Callaway Systems over the past 3 years." I slid the papers across the table. "And this," I continued, pulling out another set, "is the server log from IT. It details every modification made to those confirmations, time changes, rescheduling, and cancellations." Martin's smile wavered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. His eyes flicked toward Vanessa, who was still seated, pen poised and ready. "This is absurd," he scoffed, his voice louder than it needed to be. "You come in here with a handful of papers and expect us to believe—" I cut him off, voice steady. "You can believe it because it's true." I turned to Rick, who had been standing quietly near the back of the room, arms crossed. He nodded, stepping forward. He carried a small tablet, which he placed on the table and tapped twice. The screen lit up, displaying a time-stamped video. "March 14th, 2021, Rick said, voice clear and measured. "This is footage from Callaway Systems' main conference room." The video began to play. The room was empty at first, sunlight filtering in through the massive glass windows. A few moments later, Martin entered, his expression casual, almost careless. He walked to the head of the table, opened a folder, and sifted through its contents. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed a stack of papers into the trash can by the window. My resume. A hush settled over the room. I could feel the tension tightening, stretching thin across the polished surface of the oak table. Martin's jaw clenched, fingers gripping the arms of his chair. "This doesn't prove anything," he snarled. "Old footage, meaningless." Vanessa stood, finally breaking her silence. She walked calmly to the head of the table, sliding a slim manila folder toward the nearest board member. "What you're looking at," she began, "are meeting logs, private meetings that were not disclosed to the rest of the board, all conducted by Martin Callaway, with agendas that directly impacted Emmett Calloway's advancement within the company. A murmur rippled through the room. The board members exchanged glances, whispering in hushed tones. Martin's hands began to shake. "You have no right." "We have every right," I interjected, voice firm. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my ID badge, the one that had survived countless attempts to push me out. I placed it gently on the table, my fingers brushing the surface one last time. Then I slid it across to Martin. "You threw away my chance," I said quietly. "You buried it. But I'm still here." The silence that followed was deafening. Martin's hand hovered above the badge before he swatted it off the table. It clattered to the floor, the plastic casing cracking down the middle. A clean, jagged line that seemed to echo through the room. The chairman, who had been watching with a carefully neutral expression, cleared his throat. His gaze settled on Martin, heavy and unyielding. "We need to discuss this further." He paused, eyes flickering to me, then back to Martin. "Without you." Martin's face drained of color. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I watched as he fumbled to collect himself, his hands shaking visibly. The board members murmured to one another, their eyes avoiding his. Finally, Martin stood, back stiff, and walked out without another word. The glass door swung shut behind him, and the room exhaled collectively. I bent down, picking up the cracked ID badge, running my thumb along the jagged line. It was broken now, just like the illusion of his control. But it was mine, and I wasn't about to let it go. Martin sat at the far end of the long, polished table, fingers tapping impatiently, as if he already knew what was coming. His gaze swept across the room, lingering on the faces of the board members, each expression a careful mask of neutrality. He smirked, leaning back in his chair, as if the weight of the accusations was little more than a breeze fluttering through the glass walls of Calloway Systems. The room was packed. Executives, legal advisors, IT personnel, all packed in tight rows of chairs that lined the perimeter of the glass-walled boardroom. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving streaks of moisture clinging to the windows like fading scars. I stood at the opposite end of the table, my hands pressed firmly against the cool surface, my ID badge clipped to my shirt. A little bent, but still intact. It felt heavier than usual, a reminder of everything that had led up to this moment. Vanessa sat near the center, her fingers interlaced, back straight as a ruler. She caught my eye and gave the smallest of nods. A silent cue. I inhaled deeply, fingers tightening against the edge of the table, and began. I slid the first set of documents across the table, the paper gliding effortlessly over the polished surface until it landed neatly in front of the chairman. "These," I began, voice steady, "are internal email threads spanning the last 3 years. You'll notice the timestamps don't match the send times, appointments moved, cancellations triggered, and crucial meetings rescheduled without my consent." The chairman adjusted his glasses, leaning forward to inspect the pages. A hush settled over the room, the kind that only accompanies the weight of undeniable proof. I could hear the soft scratching of his pen as he made notes, the room holding its collective breath. Martin leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, his smile unwavering. "Paperwork," he scoffed, voice dripping with condescension. "Is this it? Some scribbled memos and outdated emails?" I didn't flinch. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a slim black tablet, placing it in front of me. With a few taps, the screen blinked to life, projecting its contents onto the wall behind me. "I thought you might say that," I replied, tapping one last time. The room dimmed slightly, and the familiar image of Calloway Systems' main conference room flickered onto the screen. The timestamp read, March 14th, 2021. The video began, showing Martin sauntering into the empty room, a folder tucked under his arm. He whistled softly as he made his way to the head of the table, dropped the folder onto the polished surface, and pulled out my resume. He flipped through the pages leisurely, pausing now and then before shaking his head. Finally, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the trash can by the window. His hands brushed together as if to wipe off dust, and he walked out without a second glance. A ripple of murmurs broke through the silence. One of the board members adjusted his tie, coughing awkwardly. Martin's smile wavered. "I don't see how that—" "There's more," I cut him off, my voice firmer. I tapped the screen again, and the video shifted, showing another conference room, this time with Martin speaking to HR personnel. The sound quality was sharp, his voice clear. "We can't afford to have him in that position. Make sure the applications are delayed. If it means bumping him out of the list, do it." A murmur spread, growing louder, whispers turning into hushed conversations. Vanessa stood up, her heels clicking sharply against the tile as she approached the table. She placed a neat stack of documents in front of the chairman. "These are internal call logs and meeting notes," she announced, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "They detail unauthorized changes to Emmett's applications, as well as private meetings that were never documented or approved by the board." Martin's eyes darted across the room, searching for an ally, but the faces staring back at him were blank, some shocked, others simply waiting for more. His hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles whitened. "This is absurd," he snapped, voice cracking slightly. "You can't just walk in here with fabricated—" "Fabricated?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "These are pulled directly from the company's secured server logs. Would you like me to demonstrate?" Silence. Martin's mouth opened and closed, his eyes narrowed. The room grew still, the tension almost tangible. Rick, who had been standing quietly by the door, finally stepped forward, nodding at me. "We checked the metadata. All timestamps are intact, no alterations. This is the raw data," he said calmly, placing his hands behind his back. The chairman leaned forward, pen tapping rhythmically against the table. "Mr. Calloway," he began, his voice slow and deliberate, "we will have to investigate this further." Martin's hands shook as he stood abruptly, palms slamming against the table. "This isn't over, Emmett," he snarled, eyes blazing. "You don't have the spine to finish this." I met his glare head-on, my hands still steady against the table. "We'll see about that," I replied evenly. His nostrils flared, and without another word, he stormed out of the room, the glass door swinging shut behind him with a sharp snap. Silence settled back into the space, heavy and unyielding. Vanessa picked up her pen, clicking it once. "Well," she said almost casually, "that went better than I expected." I allowed myself a breath, slow and measured, fingers brushing against the edge of my ID badge. It was still there, bent and battered, but still intact. I wasn't finished. Not yet. Martin's threats echoed in the hallway, but I had already moved past them. The evidence spoke louder. As I walked back to my office, the corridors of Calloway Systems were oddly quiet, as if the entire building was holding its breath. The usual hum of whispered conversations and tapping keyboards felt distant, replaced by glances exchanged behind closed doors and hushed voices that faded when I passed by. I reached my office just as my phone buzzed with a new email notification. I pulled it up on my screen, the subject line blinking with a stark simplicity. "Prepare for the fallout." It was from Vanessa. No greeting, no signature, just the 4 words that carried the weight of inevitability. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly as I watched the rain streak down the window pane, blurring the cityscape outside. An hour later, the first signs of the collapse began. An internal memo flashed across all company screens, a bold headline declaring an ongoing investigation. Martin's name was absent from the document, but it didn't need to be there. Everyone knew. You could feel it in the air, thick with anticipation and a hint of something sharper. Vindication. I stepped out into the hallway just as HR staff passed by, their faces tight with concentration, clipboards clutched to their chests. Down the hall, I saw it. Martin's office. His nameplate had been removed, leaving only a thin line of dust where it had once been. 2 HR representatives flanked the doorway, their expressions neutral but firm. The door itself was slightly ajar, and I caught a glimpse of Martin inside, his back to me, shoving papers into boxes with frantic movements. I paused, just out of sight, watching through the glass walls. His hands were shaking, papers slipping from his grip and fluttering to the floor. His tie was loosened, shirt wrinkled, a stark contrast to the composed arrogance he usually wore like armor. For a brief moment, he paused, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, shoulders heaving as if the weight of it all had finally settled. Then he straightened, snatched another stack of files, and stuffed them unceremoniously into a cardboard box. I stayed long enough to watch him hand his ID badge to the HR rep. She took it, inserted it into a small handheld device, and with a flick of her wrist snapped it in half. The crack was sharp, final. Martin flinched but said nothing. His eyes darted around the hallway, catching mine for just a brief moment. He straightened, his lips pressed into a thin line, and I met his gaze without flinching. He didn't say a word, just turned back to his packing, the door closing quietly behind him. I walked back to my office with steady steps, the echoes of my footsteps sharp against the tiled floors. Everything felt sharper, brighter even, like the clouds had finally lifted. I reached my desk just as my phone buzzed again. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. "Emmett," she began, voice steady and calm. "The board has scheduled a closed-door session. Rick and I will be presenting the restructuring plan. Martin is, well, he's being escorted out now." I glanced out of my window, looking down onto the street below. Sure enough, 2 security guards flanked Martin as he exited the building. His stride was stiff, forced. He clutched the cardboard box to his chest as if it might disappear if he let go. A few employees watched from the sidelines, their expressions caught between disbelief and quiet satisfaction. "I didn't think it would happen this quickly," I replied, watching as the guards led him to the curb, where a sleek black sedan waited. Martin hesitated, then bent his head to step inside. One of the guards shut the door behind him with a muted thud, and just like that, he was gone. Vanessa's voice crackled back to life. "He tried to play the card," she continued, "threatened to expose company secrets, some kind of leverage, but Rick was ready." "Legal injunction?" I guessed. "Filed and signed before he could even finish his sentence," she replied, a hint of satisfaction creeping into her voice. "He never saw it coming." A silence hung between us for a moment, heavy with resolution. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "What happens now?" "Now?" Vanessa said, her tone turning pragmatic. "Now we rebuild. The board is with us. They just needed proof, and you gave it to them." "Not alone," I replied, my voice softer. "You and Rick, I couldn't have done this without you." "Maybe," she conceded, "but you're the one who walked back in. That counts for something." The call ended, and I set the phone down carefully, letting the quiet settle around me. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair and stepped out into the hallway. I walked past Martin's office, now empty, the lights dimmed, and the door locked. Just outside HR, something caught my eye. There, half buried under a pile of shredded memos and crumpled documents, was my old ID badge. The one Martin had thrown. The one that had been cracked during the confrontation. I bent down, dusted it off, and turned it over in my hands. The crack was still there, jagged and raw, but it was mine. It had survived. Without a second thought, I slipped it into my jacket pocket, its weight familiar and grounding. I stepped back out into the hallway, the air feeling lighter, cleaner somehow. Callaway Systems was about to change, and I wasn't planning to be a silent observer. As I walked back to my office, my phone buzzed one more time. I pulled it out, Rick's name flashing across the screen. His message was simple, just 4 words. Your time is now. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the words settle over me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just smiled, the rain finally stopping outside my window. Your time is now. The subject line glowed on my screen, the bold letters casting a soft glow in the dim light of my new office. I leaned back, letting the words sink in, a slow smile spreading across my face. Outside, the sun spilled over Seattle's skyline, bathing the Callaway Systems headquarters in a light that felt cleaner, purer than it had in years. Rick's voice echoed in my mind from our last phone call. Change doesn't just happen, it's built. And that's exactly what we were doing. The Renewal Fund had launched just weeks after Martin's departure. The announcement had come during a company-wide meeting, one I led from the head of the long, polished table that used to be Martin's domain. Vanessa stood beside me, poised and steady, her gaze sweeping over the room with a quiet confidence. Rick lingered near the back, his arms crossed, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. I remembered the murmurs that had passed through the room when I announced the fund, scholarships and retraining programs for employees over 40, those who had been cast aside by shifting priorities and technological upheavals. It was more than just a gesture. It was a statement. We were building bridges where Martin had burned them. My office now sat on the corner of the 40th floor, glass walls stretching across 2 sides, offering panoramic views of the city below. It was smaller than Martin's had been, but far more personal. Photos lined the shelves, some of my family, others of past projects, memories of what I had built before the walls came crashing down. And there, just above my desk, hung my old ID badge, now encased in glass. The crack down the middle was still visible, a jagged line that ran through my name. I hadn't replaced it. I didn't want to. It was a reminder of resilience, of redemption, of the years I spent clawing back everything I had lost. I reached out sometimes, brushing my fingertips against the surface, feeling the cold glass under my skin. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Vanessa knocked on the door, poking her head inside with a smile. "We're ready," she announced. I straightened my tie, smoothing the creases in my jacket before nodding. "Let's do it." The main floor of Callaway Systems had been transformed. The gray cubicles that once lined the walls were gone, replaced with open spaces, collaborative desks, and bright, natural light. There were new faces, young graduates eager to make their mark and older ones, those I remembered from years before, now returning with heads held high. The Renewal Fund had done its job, bringing back those who had been forced out, offering them another chance to build something lasting. Rick waited by the entrance to the auditorium, arms folded, the familiar glimmer of satisfaction still lighting his eyes. "Not bad, kid," he murmured as I approached. "Not bad?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're losing your touch, Rick. That sounded almost like a compliment." He chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder. "Get in there and make me proud." The doors opened, and the room filled with applause. It started slow, building in volume as I walked toward the podium, nodding at familiar faces along the way. Some of them I hadn't seen in years. Former colleagues, friends, even a few who had left under Martin's thumb. They were back now, and the energy in the room was palpable. I stepped up to the microphone, letting the applause die down before I spoke. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "I stand here today, not just as a representative of Callaway Systems, but as proof that resilience matters, that fairness matters, and that opportunity should never be limited by age, circumstance, or the decisions of one person." The room went silent, every eye trained on me. Today, we move forward with a commitment to rebuilding, not just this company, but the trust that was lost along the way. The Renewal Fund is just the beginning. Our goal is to ensure that talent and dedication are rewarded, no matter your age, your title, or your tenure. The applause erupted again, louder this time. I stepped back, letting it wash over me, the weight of it settling in my chest. It felt good. It felt real. After the crowd dispersed, I lingered near the back of the room, watching as old friends reconnected, shaking hands and exchanging stories. Vanessa approached, a folder tucked under her arm. "You did well," she said, nodding approvingly. "Couldn't have done it without you," I replied. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "You're right," she said without missing a beat. "But I appreciate the sentiment." She handed me the folder, her smile fading just a bit. "This came for you," she said quietly. I took it from her hands, flipping it open. An embossed invitation lay inside, the lettering bold and unmistakable. Annual Town Fair, keynote speaker Emmett Callaway. I stared at it for a moment, the weight of it heavy in my hands. The town fair, the one Martin had dominated for years, always taking the stage, always controlling the narrative. But this year it was different. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Think you're ready for it?" I closed the folder, tucking it under my arm. "More than ready," I replied, my gaze steady. "It's time to write a new story." The light streaming through the windows caught the edge of my glass-encased ID badge, the cracks refracting tiny slivers of light across the room. It shimmered, steady and unbroken, a symbol of survival, of a second chance finally realized. The town fair was just as I remembered, colorful, bustling, but this time the stage was mine. The banners flapped gently in the autumn breeze, casting shadows that danced across the grass. Children ran between stalls, their laughter cutting through the hum of conversation. The smell of roasted chestnuts and fresh cider lingered in the air, mingling with the distant echo of carnival games. It was the same fair I had attended for years, always as a spectator, never as a speaker. Until today. I stood near the main stage, hands tucked into the pockets of my coat, watching the crew set up the podium. The stage was modest but well-built, draped in deep green fabric, with the Callaway Systems logo proudly displayed above. The Renewal Fund banner hung just below, the words stitched in white thread. A second chance for every age. Rick appeared beside me, his hands clasped behind his back, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Not bad," he murmured, nodding toward the setup. "Not bad at all," I replied, my eyes never leaving the stage. The air was crisp, the kind of coolness that bites gently at the skin but leaves you feeling awake, alive. Rick slapped a hand on my shoulder. "You ready for this?" I turned to him, letting the question settle for a moment. "More than ready," I said, the confidence in my voice surprising even me. The sound of a microphone crackling to life pulled my attention back to the stage. Vanessa was up there now, her voice clear and steady, as she introduced the Renewal Fund's first round of scholarships. Her presence commanded respect, her words sharp and purposeful. She had been instrumental in setting up this event, ensuring everything ran smoothly, every detail perfected. When she finished speaking, the applause was genuine, warm. She glanced over at me, nodding once. I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment press against my chest, then stepped up onto the platform. The applause grew louder, spreading through the crowd like a ripple. I approached the podium, adjusting the microphone slightly. The crowd quieted, their eyes fixed on me. Faces I recognized, old colleagues, community members, even some of the people who had benefited from the renewal fund, stood shoulder to shoulder, watching with anticipation. I cleared my throat, my hands gripping the sides of the podium. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice carrying across the open field. "I want to thank you all for being here today, for believing in something bigger than just a company or a fund, for believing in each other." A wave of nods spread through the crowd, and I pressed on. "The renewal fund was born from a simple idea," I continued. "That age is not a barrier. That experience should be valued, not discarded. And that no matter where you are in life, there's always room for a second chance." I stepped back slightly, nodding toward Vanessa, who stepped forward with a small wooden box. I opened it, revealing a series of polished plaques, scholarships for mid-career professionals looking to rebuild what was once taken from them. The names were engraved in neat lines, each plaque symbolizing not just an opportunity, but a reclamation. One by one I called their names. They walked up, hands shaking slightly, eyes bright with hope. I shook each hand firmly, meeting their eyes, feeling the weight of their journeys in that brief connection. Each handshake was a promise, an acknowledgement that they were seen, valued, and given the chance I had fought so hard for. The applause was thunderous, echoing across the fairgrounds, bouncing off the distant trees. I looked out into the sea of faces, seeing pride, hope, and something else, a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. For the first time in years, I felt like Callaway Systems belonged to the community. It was theirs as much as it was mine. Vanessa stepped back up to the podium, holding a small bronze plaque in her hands. "We have one more thing," she announced, her voice carrying easily over the crowd. She gestured for me to join her, and together we unveiled it. The plaque was simple but powerful. "In recognition of resilience, growth, and second chances, Callaway Systems, building bridges." The crowd erupted in applause once more, but this time it was different. It felt deeper, more meaningful. I stepped back, watching as hands clapped together, strangers and friends alike, bound by something stronger than just business. It was community. It was renewal. As the event wound down, I found myself wandering the fairgrounds, shaking hands, exchanging smiles with people I'd known for years. The leaves crunched underfoot, golden and crisp, scattering with each step. I paused for a moment, breathing in the autumn air, letting it settle in my lungs. That's when I saw him. He stood near the edge of the fair, half concealed by the shadow of a poplar tree. Martin. His hands were stuffed deep into the pockets of his coat, his shoulders hunched against the chill. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't speaking. He just watched, eyes trained on the stage, the banner, the people laughing and shaking hands. For a moment, our eyes met, and I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or loss. But just as quickly, it was gone. He turned and walked away, his figure shrinking against the backdrop of the fair until he was just another shadow among the trees. I watched him disappear, the leaves swirling in his wake. A part of me wanted to call out, to bridge the gap that had grown between us over so many years. But another part knew better. Some things were better left unsaid. I turned back toward the fair, the sound of laughter and life filling the air once more. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fully healed, but it was a start. And sometimes, that was enough. The sun dipped low over the fairgrounds, casting long shadows across the grass where children played, their laughter mingling with the distant hum of carnival rides. I stood beside the stage, fingers grazing the smooth surface of my old ID badge, now polished and encased in glass, a symbol of survival, of redemption. Sometimes bridges collapse so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding, and for me, that journey started the moment I picked up the pieces and decided not to let them go. For those who have faced setbacks, be it a career loss, family betrayal, or broken trust, know that sometimes the very thing that shatters you can be the cornerstone of something stronger. It just takes time, patience, and a little faith to see it through. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share your story with us, or subscribe to hear more tales of resilience and hope.